Making the decision to get into Dolby Atmos in that world is a whole complicated and frankly overwhelming aspect. I spent 2 years pretty much, you know, playing around with the format in my DAW on headphones, messing around with some ideas that I had because I have some very specific reasons to get into Atmos that are different from a lot of other people that I'll get into a bit later. But I knew that I was probably going to want a specialized interface that could deal with all the extra speakers and everything. But at the same time, I didn't want to invest a whole lot of money into an interface that was only going to be able to do Atmos and have to figure out a way to, finagle it into a whole nother system that was going to work for stereo. I don't really plan on doing a whole lot of remixing for people's stuff. I'm going to need to track inside of the Dolby Atmos world and track with that interface as well. So I think Audient hit a really good middle ground with designing an interface that's affordable, but really feature packed that, in my opinion, regardless of the price point, just seemed like the right direction to go because it gave me the ability to be able to track with it as well. It's got 16 inputs via ADAT, and future expandability is also going to be an issue for me as I expand the studio because I pretty much started from scratch when I decided to do Atmos. I sold my console, I sold most of my outboard gear. I'm starting from scratch, so the Audient Oria was a great starting point. I think it's going to be a good platform to expand for me in the future, regardless of how I do it. So let's go ahead and dive into some features. I'll talk about some of the unique challenges that I had and how Audient helped solve those issues. You'll have to excuse any thunder you hear happening in the background. Arkansas is going through an epic set of storms right now. There's tornadoes all around me. Anyway, this would be a good place to start at the front wall in my space because I have a very unique setup here. I started out with my Barefoot MM45s for stereo. I've had them in this space for a few years, and I've been working on Barefoot monitors for well over 10 years at this point. I like their lineup. They work well for me. I love the MM45s. I definitely didn't want to get rid of them for stereo, but there was no way I could afford a full Atmos setup using MM45s. They're pretty expensive. And so when Barefoot came out with their smaller, more affordable Footprint 03s, I knew I wanted to have the exact same speaker for every speaker in the 7.1.4 setup. And I wanted to use Barefoot's new LFE 15 sub to use in the Atmos setup and to work as a 0.1 and an extension of my stereo setup. So as you see, I've got the Footprint sitting on top of the MM45, so that presented a whole lot of issues. In a minute, I'll walk through kind of what I did with SonarWorks and how I walked through and kind of navigated this whole mess and unique setup, but it wasn't too hard to work around those things with Oria. So I've got the MM45s in stereo. They're running into the Barefoot subs with a crossover at 80 Hertz. Then I've got a full set of Footprint 03s running in Atmos in the 7.1.4, utilizing the LFE as the LFE channel. Now, another unique thing about me doing Atmos out here is that I'm not necessarily interested in remixing everyone's stereo things into Atmos. I actually wanted to track in Atmos from the beginning and, record using some unique things like ambisonic mics, for instance. So I knew when I was looking for an interface to accommodate all of this, I needed to be able to record with it as well. Now, there's a lot of ways to go about this and a lot of options, but most of the more affordable Atmos-centered and geared interfaces right now are more geared for the smaller starter speaker setups, and they don't have a lot of inputs. They just have outputs for the speakers. So that was a problem right off the bat because I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money getting into this because I already invested a lot into the speakers. I just wanted something that was simple to get me up and running so that I could just get up and running here and, start working immediately. And then, in another year, start to expand. So expandability was also a big concern in my choice. The great thing about the Oria is that it's got ADAT expansion to expand your inputs by 16 inputs right out of the gate. And I've had MillSounds here for getting close to 10 years, so I've always run 16 inputs. That was plenty to get me started. So I know just starting out for the next year, the Oria is going to be able to cover me for tracking as well, which was huge. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's any other interfaces that could accommodate this at this price point and have this much input as well. Obviously, no extra outputs, but that's a problem. As I say, that's a problem for future, Matt. But right now, I'm up and running. I'm tracking for stereo sessions. I'm actually been able to get away with sending headphone cues right out of Pro Tools and running at a lower buffer. That's been great. I haven't had any issues running it that way. The Oria does have a built-in system for you to send low latency cue mixes and everything. It's there if I need it, but so far I've run at a lower buffer in Pro Tools and I haven't had any issues, so that's been great. Now, again, I've been stressing expandability because I know at some point I'm going to need to expand my system a little bit further when funds are available and I recover from this craziness right off the bat. But the other great thing that Oria offers is DANTE expandability. I haven't really worked with DANTE yet. I have a few friends that have studios that run on DANTE, and it seems pretty straightforward. And I think it's probably something I'm going to look into more in a few years when I have the money for a nicer interface to expand into something, crazy like a Burl setup or something. You can expand into DANTE with the Oria, so that opens up a whole new world of possibilities because I don't really have to worry about a bunch of interfaces working together. Now, if I do decide to go with something that doesn't have DANTE, I just need to make sure that it has enough outputs available because you can even use the Oria as a standalone monitor controller, that runs SonarWorks and all your routing for your speakers. So again, my biggest issues were trying to work around having a dedicated stereo set of monitors as well as the 7.1.4 system, and then further being able to share the subwoofer between my dedicated stereo system and the LFE and the Atmos setup. Let's go ahead and dive in. I'll show you kind of what I did with SonarWorks and how I worked around all this because there's a lot of cool, ways to work around this within Oria. Let's go ahead and run through the Oria desktop app. This, by the way, this is really fantastic because as you can probably see behind me, you can also run this from your iPad, which is huge. Right now I've got the Oria mounted in the very bottom of my rack because it's pretty much out of sight, out of mind. Anything I need to do with the Oria can be done in the app that I keep on a screen above me or be controlled with the iPad app, which is super awesome. That was a big thing because there are some nicer, more expensive Atmos-centered and multi-channel interfaces that have add-ons for monitor controllers, but they get pretty expensive. That's free if you've got an iPad. So, even if you have to invest in an iPad, couple of $100 for a dedicated kind of hardware monitor controller for multi-channel, that's great. Let me walk you through some of the things I did with SonarWorks and some of the things I did with the Oria app for my unique situation. A lot of this, some of you might want to skip through because it might not be centered towards you. Again, one of the big challenges that I had was getting my dedicated stereo set of monitors to be able to share the subwoofer with the Atmos system. If you just have a single or even two different pairs of dedicated stereo monitors that you want to have with your dedicated Atmos setup, there's actually stereo outputs, 2 sets of them that you can switch between on the Oria. So if you're just going to use those stereo monitors without any sort of sub, it's really easy for you to just switch between those. The only problem with those dedicated outputs on the Oria is that there is no built-in crossover to be able to utilize a sub with those. So that was a problem for me, but it might not be a problem for a lot of you. So that might make your lives a lot easier. So first off, SonarWorks, I would say starting out, I've used SonarWorks for a bunch of years. I've learned some things over the years, but one thing that I did learn from doing this a million different times and trying different setups and configurations with the Atmos setup is that When I had the mic, the Omni mic, facing up instead of facing the speakers, when I had that facing up, I actually was able to get a much better kind of representation of things coming from around me. When I did it the first time, I tried having the mic face the monitors, and there weren't any problems. I got through the calibration and everything sounded good. But the second time, when I tried some different stuff, I actually tried facing the mic up, and it was subtle, but I think the way it calculates the delays between the speakers with the mic facing up just worked way better. I actually was able to pan stuff around in my DAW, and it felt a lot more seamless going between the speakers. So my experience, if you're going to shoot out your room for multi-channel and you have the SonarWorks mic that comes, I think they come with the Oria. I think I already had one, but if you're going to use that mic to shoot out your room with SonarWorks, which you should, you get better results in my experience. Make sure that mic is facing up. Trust me, there was a difference. I could hear a difference between when I did it facing the monitors and then facing up and down. And again, I think it has to do with how it calculates the delays when they're reaching the mic, the Omni mic, when it's facing up, as opposed to maybe hitting the sides of the mic when it's facing the other way. I'm not sure about that, but pro tip, keep it facing up. Now, unfortunately, starting up SonarWorks, it's pretty straightforward and it's easy, but it takes a while. It's about a 45-minute ordeal, and I did this a lot of times because there's a few things I wanted to experiment and try out. So let's look at the Audient app real quick. First thing you'll notice is that you can actually run bigger setups. If at some point I want to add wides, I can, but at this point, since I'm running 7.1.4, I'm not using the wides that are located over here. Actually, let's go over here. So those are profiles. I'll get to those for a second. But in order for me to use the built-in crossover that each channel has in the Oria, those crossovers only work on the Atmos speaker outputs. They do not work on the two dedicated stereo sets of outputs. So like I said, with my Barefoot MM45s, I also wanted those speakers to be able to utilize the subwoofer that the Atmos system was using as well. So the way I worked around this was that when I set up SonarWorks, instead of doing a 7.1.4 calibration, I actually set it up in SonarWorks as a 9.1.4 calibration to tell SonarWorks that I had a wide set of speakers in my Atmos system. And I plugged in my stereo speakers to the left wide and the right wide. Now, when you shoot out the room, it's going to determine delays for your whole Atmos system, thinking that those wides are part of the Atmos system. So unfortunately, that's probably not going to work out well because it's calculating delays as those speakers being in a wide set in the Atmos system. If you're going to use those wides or one of the other not utilized Atmos channels to plug in your dedicated stereo set, you're going to have to make sure that when you get into that, you actually turn off the delay on those wide speakers like I did, because that delay that SonarWorks is going to determine for the system is not going to work just in stereo. So hold on to that thought. We'll come right back to it. So I went ahead and calibrated SonarWorks as a 9.1.4 system with the idea that my main stereo left and right are coming out of the left wide and the right wide outputs. After I had done that, I went in and did a separate SonarWorks calibration and actually calibrated it as a 2.1 system to where it's doing stereo with a dedicated sub output. The only reason I ran that was so that I could determine what my delay would be between the subwoofer and the speakers if that was a dedicated stereo system. After I ran the 2.1 calibration in SonarWorks, which it didn't, I didn't really, I just needed it to determine a delay. I didn't care what it was doing EQ-wise or anything. I'm actually going to toss this calibration at some point. But when I did it, it was able to determine that as a 2.1 system with a sub, the delay between the subwoofer and my main left and right speakers for me was actually, 6.1 milliseconds for the left and 6.14 milliseconds for the right. So I wrote down those two numbers. I went back into my 9.1.4 calibration, and on the left and the right wides, I typed in my delay of 6.21 milliseconds for the left and 6.14 milliseconds for the right. Now the only reason this works is because when SonarWorks determines the speaker delay for a system with a sub, the vast majority, I don't want to say every time because there might be some exceptions that I'm not thinking of, but the vast majority of the time, your LFE, your low frequency sub, is going to need to be delayed from the speakers, but SonarWorks is actually going to leave the delay at 0 for the sub and offset everything else after the fact. So because that's how it works, just with physics and everything, I was actually able to redo the delay based off what the 2.1 calibration gave me. So I went in here and I just typed in my delay of 6.21 for the left and 6.14 for the left wide and right wide. Now, when I have my main Atmos calibration, if I'm running it as 7.1.4, it's not going to send any information to those wides unless I specify that it should. So right out of the gate, I don't have to worry about any information being accidentally sent to those wides in my DAW if I have everything set up in my DAW. Then, when I'm doing dedicated stereo work and I just want to work with my left and right speakers, all I have to do in Pro Tools or any other DAW that you're using is tell it that your dedicated stereo outputs are going to be that left wide and right wide. And then after that, I just made sure that I turned on the crossover at 80 Hertz, which is what Barefoot recommends for those speakers with a sub if you're doing a crossover. So that might be a little too much information for some of you that aren't going to run into this problem, but I knew that it was very important for me that if I was going to spend all of this money on such a nice subwoofer, I better damn well be able to use it with my stereo speakers as well, because that was an exorbitant amount of money just for an LFE for the Atmos system. There's cheaper options out there. I did know from experience with my MM45s that at sometimes I do want a little bit more low-end oomph and a little bit more headroom from those speakers. So running those with the sub sounds amazing. It's spectacular. And at that point, to me at least, it was worth the investment if I was going to be able to share that subwoofer channel between the Atmos system and the stereo system. So again, that's a problem that I had specifically. I know there's going to be other people that are going to run into this at some point and realize that they can't use the crossover with the dedicated stereo outs on the Oria. There's workarounds. And again, this is a testament to the versatility of this interface. It's really easy to figure out, workarounds for very specific problems, because if I wasn't going to be able to get this to work with the Oria, I would have had to go with something else. And at that point, to be honest, I probably couldn't have been able to afford such a nice speaker system. So thank you, Audient. There's one more thing I'd like to talk about, and that's a preset that I have on the Oria called Fun Couch. With the layout of my control room, I actually have a couch sitting behind my mix position where clients are going to sit. And I wanted there to be a way that the client sitting on the couch could actually hear the Atmos mix fairly accurately. The problem with that is when you do a calibration for Atmos in your mix position, the delays that SonarWorks calculates out for all your speakers are very determinate for this mix position. And if you move out of it too far, even moving your head back maybe 2 feet, you start hearing some phase issues and stuff. It's very determinant on you being in this exact position. So the great thing about Oria is that you can save profiles. Now, I actually did a whole nother calibration with SonarWorks with the mic back on the couch so that I could switch over to the fun couch position, so that if clients want to hear something, I can switch over to that preset, and now the speakers and delays and everything are calibrated for that position of the couch being the mix position. There's a couple of other cool things I did with it. Because I knew being that far out of the sweet spot wasn't going to be ideal, I decided to have some fun with this and just make it sound really cool. For my front wall of the left, center, and right speaker, I actually have it set up to where I've switched to my MM45s, the bigger speakers being the main left and rights, and then the normal center channel stays the same, so that I just get a little more oomph and headroom from those nicer speakers being my main left and rights. The other thing that I did is on my front wall, if you'll look over at the crossover, on the right, center, and left channels, I have the crossover set at 80 Hertz. That means that any information being sent to that front wall is going to be supported with the sub as well. Now, that's not going to be as accurate, obviously, but because that couch position being so far out of the sweet spot is already a compromise, I thought I'd have some fun with it. And the cool thing is the Oria gives you so many cool options, and you can actually cross over every single speaker in your Atmos rig if you want to. So if, for instance, you're using a very small pair of speakers and you need a little bit more headroom out of them, you can set a global crossover over your whole speaker system to like 40 or 60 Hertz and not go too crazy and just get a little bit more low end out of your system and headroom. I've experimented with this. My advice is to be very careful. It might sound cooler. It's not going to be as accurate. And one of my reasons for spending so much on a nice three-way system on every single speaker in here was so that it would be extremely full range and it would be the same speaker everywhere. So in terms of accuracy, my normal profile without the crossovers and utilizing the footprint 03s on everything sounds much more accurate. It's not even close. But on the couch for clients, or when you're just having some fun, or maybe watching a movie, because I put a big 60-inch screen on this table sometimes and watch some movies. I mean, I like to have fun. But you can do a lot of things to have some fun presets as well to kind of voice your speakers just to sound a little bit more cooler and have a little bit more headroom. So I do have that fun couch setting when I need to switch over and have clients hear things a little bit more accurately when there's a lot of us in the room. So again, a lot of cool features that are built into the Oria. As I close out the video here, I wanted to re-emphasize some points. Some of the unique challenges I had were combining my stereo set of monitors with the Atmos system and being able to share the LFE sub-channel. I was able to do that and walked you through how I was able to utilize the left wide and right wide for the stereo channel and use the built-in crossover, and how I got around some of those issues with doing the SonarWorks calibration to, match and work between those two worlds, the stereo and the Atmos world. Talked about expandability. Again, I don't know how I'm going to expand the studio as I move forward. It's going to be a process, but it's not something I'm worried about because I know with the versatility of Oria, I can either expand via DANTE, I can just get a really high output count interface and just use it as an external kind of monitor controller, still using the iPad app, which is awesome. I mean, all these features are great. So right out of the gate, it handled all the needs I had for my smaller studio space, even though I'm tracking full bands here, It's not like I'm only doing small home projects or anything. I'm doing full band productions. 16 inputs was plenty to get me started. I've run the studio like that for years. And again, however I decide to expand in the future, I think Audient's going to be able to handle that, and it's probably going to stick around with me for a while. So, didn't take long to get to know. Pretty straightforward process. I'm not using the low latency Q mixer at this point that's built into the Oria. It's there. I might change my workflow in the future. We'll see. But at the time, again, running Pro Tools at a lower buffer rate with the Oria has been great. I haven't probably had 6 different artists in here since I've had that up and running, and none of them have complained about latency. I'm fairly sensitive to latency, and I've recorded myself a few times, and it wasn't too bad. I would say it might be a smidge higher than it was when I was doing the low latency mix with my Apollo console, with my Apollo interface, but from running right out of Pro Tools at a low latency, I think it's more than acceptable. I didn't do any technical numbers, but to my ears, totally acceptable and not a problem. So we'll see how the studio grows. We'll see how my workflow grows, but I think the biggest point is that I don't think the Oria is ever going to, be the bottleneck in any of these expandability issues that I'm going to have to tackle in the future. So Oria is a great value, lots of features, lots of ways to work through, unique issues that you might have in your setup. So definitely give it a go. Check it out. Thanks for watching.